aware of is that our budget proposals this year include healthy sums of money for match funds for both A&R, and primarily this is where A&R is impacted for Clean Water Fund. And this proposal really is trying to make sure we make the most of an opportunity right now to put away funds while we are in a relatively healthy economic condition, make sure that we can participate in federal programs over the next 5 years. Um, and we are, going to be talking more with the legislature about that over the next several months. AOT, Secretary Flynn's shop, also has a significant and same type of proposal to put away funds right now to make sure we have match to participate fully in the federal opportunities over the next 5 years. Just the ones we've been able to identify right now are pretty substantial. So this is not a, the position of the board. I'm sharing that as Deputy Secretary of the Administration, that this is something that's very important to us and we think is the right time to invest in clean water. So if you do interact with legislators, please keep it in mind that match money is very important. And it's not very exciting, right? It doesn't get us results we can grab onto this year, but it is crucial. And 5 years from now, 10 years from now, that match money returns more than a 4-to-1 investment in general. So it's the smartest way we can spend our money is maximizing those federal programs. And a lot of the economic forecasts over the next 2 to 3 years, they're not as healthy, they're not as optimistic. So if we see our fortunes reverse, we're going to have a hard time putting up the money to stay in those federal programs and get all the grants that we can. And there's a big impact to our clean water efforts. Opportunity we never thought we'd have 5 to 10 years ago. So I think it's one thing that's very important to us is making sure we put the money in the place where it'll do the most good. Did I buy enough time, Emily?
Great job, quorum. Yes, we have Bob Flynn has joined, and I have received word that Secretary Moore and Secretary Tebbets should be with us momentarily. Busy this legislative session.
Right.
So we could probably go ahead and get started with an overview of the agenda.
All right.
Screen.
All right. So welcome everyone to the February 22nd meeting of the Clean Water Board. Just going through the agenda, I'm doing the quick welcome right now. After that, Secretary Moore is going to take us through the FY24 Clean Water Budget recommendation, not the whole thing, but just some highlights there, I believe, if she's only got 5 minutes, so it's not going to be super in the weeds. After that, Nick Kramer is doing our Clean Water Fund operating statement, followed by Emily Burr doing the write-up of the contingency reserve plan of how we approach the money intended to help us navigate some of those economic troubled waters I mentioned earlier. And then we move on to a presentation, recommendations of the Water Quality Trading Report by Chip. And I apologize, I'm not going to even mangle Chip's last name right now. And then we'll do some public comment time, followed by other business and wrapping up the meeting. So should be a lot of good information in today's meeting. I appreciate everyone's patience as we get started here. We're a little bit behind schedule, but that's to be expected this time of year, right? And I'm sure we'll make it up. And I can say personally, I don't know if any other board members have a hard stop, but we'll make sure that if there is public comment that we reserve the right amount of time for that. That's always very important for us. So if we have to cut anything short, it will not be the public comment section of the meeting. Do we have enough here to?
Has arrived, just so you know, she's able to move forward with our agenda.
Great. All right. So first order of business then is we have the December 7th, 2022 meeting minutes on as a consent item. Just making sure if any members of the board have any comments or edits for those minutes. All right. Seeing none, we can consider those meeting minutes adopted. And now moving on to Secretary Moore for a review of the FY24 Clean Water Budget recommendation from Governor Scott.
Thank you. My apologies for being late in joining you all. I thought I would I'm happy to answer any questions the board may have about the FY24 budget recommend, but in my remarks right now, I'm going to focus on the changes from what the Clean Water Board had recommended to the governor for his consideration. They are shown on the spreadsheet that's on the screen right now, and also in board packets. They're indicated in yellow. I'll start first with line 2.11, which is the forest water quality practices and portable skidder bridges line item. There were a couple of different changes to this line item. It was increased by roughly $33,000 to account for to meet the funding needs for personnel capacity to support implementation of forest water quality practices. Then a portion of that was also transferred to the one-time funds portion of the budget. And there's broader context here, which is that there are a significant number of limited service positions that have been created within this agency as a result of federal funding and other one-time monies that we have been the beneficiary of. And this is sort of reflects a consistent approach to how we are budgeting other similar positions in the agency. Next, I would move on to line 4.4, which is the state match to the Clean Water State Revolving Fund. We had budgeted, I think, $1.1 million, but in the end, the governor's recommend was $333,000. This reflects the most recent and best information we have from EPA about the match required to draw down all of the Clean Water State Revolving Fund that is available to us this year. There are changes in funding policies at the federal level that have resulted in a modest decrease currently in our Clean Water State Revolving Fund federal grant, and that's reflected by a corresponding reduction, therefore, in the match that we need to provide. This is a more significant reduction because we saw a similar change very late in fiscal year 23. So we actually have some balance from last year that in funding from the Clean Water Fund that was committed to this match. And so between the 2 years, with this additional $333,000, we have sufficient funding to draw down all of the federal grant that is available to us. The final change I would note is around municipal pollution control grants. The board had recommended $3.3 million, and this is part of a larger story in that the governor's recommended budget proposes to use a significant amount of one-time general fund dollars instead of capital bill bonded dollars to take advantage of the unprecedented federal funding we are eligible for under the bipartisan infrastructure law. So off of this spreadsheet and in a different set of recommendations, the governor has proposed $27 million to fully access the state revolving funds at the federal level. And part and parcel of that is Vermont has always committed to providing municipal pollution control grants to help communities leverage those federal infrastructure investments. And so as a result, you'll see that we have increased, or the governor's recommended budget increases the municipal pollution control grant line item from $3.3 million to $10 million. So the net effect of this is actually a larger clean water budget than what the board had recommended. It's just we've moved things around a little bit, in large part to take full advantage of federal funds. One other piece I would flag is down at the bottom. We have updated the projected FY25 budget targets. This is to reflect both updated projected revenue, and I think Nick may speak to that in a bit more detail in a few minutes' time, It also reflects updated information available to us on the capital bill. Deputy Secretary Farnham can probably speak to this in more detail, but the state's overall capital bill ask decreased significantly this year at the recommendation of the Capital Debt Affordability Committee. And so we were asked to sort of absorb our portion of it, and so hold steady at the $10 million ask that we make in the 24 budget to anticipate we would again have $10 million in FY25. And then the remaining one-time clean water funds available in FY25 were slightly reduced due to the increase in the FPR budget line item that I spoke to above. So I'm happy to answer questions about any of those changes or other line items in the budget that I didn't speak to. But I would say that the takeaway is that we continue to have really robust revenue in the Clean Water Fund, strong set of recommendations advanced by the governor, and look forward to accomplishing a significant amount of work with assuming the legislature's support for this budget in fiscal 24.
Right. Thank you, Secretary Moore. Any members of the board have any questions for Secretary Moore?
I'm not seeing any hands raised.
Okay. All right. I think we can move on to the next segment of the agenda then, to review the Clean Water Fund operating statement with Nick Kramer.
All right. Thanks, Deputy Secretary Farnham. I don't know. Here I am. I'm on screen now. Hello, everybody. So yeah, Nick Kramer with the Department of Finance and Management. I think I'm picking up basically where Secretary Moore left off. As is typical, I think the headline for these Clean Water Fund operating statements pretty closely mirrors the headlines for the state's revenue forecasts in general. So a lot of what I'll walk through here is really just the trickle-down effects of the latest e-board meeting in January. They met on January 17th to present their revised consensus forecast. And at a high altitude, before I get into any of the weeds, I mean, I think the story is really that, you know, Vermont continues to see in some ways an unprecedentedly high level of revenue. We're sort of riding this wave of the swelling effect of all the federal stimulus money that's come through the state. As folks may remember from the summertime, this wave is projected to end, right? And like Deputy Secretary Farnham mentioned earlier, in the out years, the years we're approaching, we're projected to see, in fact, decreases in some of our revenue streams. And so we're kind of coming to, I'd say, the end of this golden period. The question, of course, is exactly when. So overall, a lot of the FY23 forecasts as presented by the economists were actually up or slight increases from what was presented last summer. But as I think we'll see when we get into the numbers here, we may be already showing some signs of slowing revenues. And so I think that's just sort of the high level context to bear in mind. So I draw everybody's attention first to the first of the orange columns. It's January 23 revenue update that for FY23. So quickly moving line by line, you can see the clean water surcharge, which is roughly 1/3 of the Clean Water Fund revenue. That's actually a slight decrease. Property transfer tax was one of the revenue streams the economists projected to decline, having to do with the housing market and a bit of the burst of that bubble, perhaps. So that represents a decline. Behind these numbers, what's not showing on the page is how we're tracking in terms of actuals received through January. And thanks to our colleagues at the tax department, we get monthly updates to that effect. And so unfortunately, this is one, for instance, where we're actually a little under 20% behind forecast currently through January, or a difference of about, I don't have it in net, but we are tracking slightly behind. We were tracking above for the first 4 or 5 months of the year. The trend seems to be reversing. So I think this is one to watch, in other words. We'll see how we finish up the year. Moving down to, I guess it's line E, the abandoned bottle deposits or the sheets there. This revenue stream there, we upgraded based on the first 6 months of actuals. So that is going up. The actuals to date, in fact, do track above forecast. So even with that upgrade, we're still about 12% up. So that offsets slightly the down in property transfer tax, but not entirely. And then lastly, the meals and rooms tax, slight revenue forecast upgrade there. In actuality, we're about on target. We're down 0.6%. So overall, to date, we're about 5.8 below forecast. That's the revised forecast. So it's a lot to keep track of here, but you can compare the green column to the orange column, and you see overall we got a slight revenue boost from 26.9 to 27.2 based on actuals received to date. You know, it remains to be seen whether we hit those new targets or not. So I'll maybe take a breath there if there are any pressing questions. I know that's a lot, and then I'll quickly run through sort of the rest of FY23 and projections for the next years. Any questions from board members on that?
Hold on.
Hearing none,
Oops.
perhaps. Oh, yep. Looks like Jim. Yeah.
Right. So we're projecting a little bit down, but our budget was only 23.6. So compared to budget, we're substantially above. Am I missing something?
So I would say compared to budget, that 20, yes, that's accurate. I mean, it's possible if no revenue came in, we could still land below budget. I think we're still within that margin of error, but very unlikely.
Right. So I look at it as we're pretty good. We're maybe below the updated forecast, but we're substantially above what was budgeted.
Right. And I think that'll, in my next comments, kind of address, I think given this whole picture of perhaps declining revenue incoming, in a lot of ways, it really validates this board's decision in how they've chosen to allocate some of the future, the setting up of the one-time appropriations, I think was a good idea. We'll see, even if, you know, we start to massively undershoot forecast in the next couple of years, there's a cushion built in on the order of about $6 million based on that construct of having FY24 one-time appropriations and then sort of a budgeted, a rough amount for FY25. So maybe if it makes sense, I'll go there unless there's other specific questions on the FY23 revenue to date. Okay. So now hearing none, I think truly, continuing down that column, that orange January 23 revenue update, you can see the budget is what it is. That's unchanged. If folks go all the way down to, I think it's line AE, the current year unallocated unreserved, the net effect of the revenue upgrade is that instead of a projected ending balance, so to speak, of about $1 million, we're now at about $1.3 million. Again, depending on the actual revenues received. That in turn trickles through to the very bottom line. That's line AI. The sum of the prior year balance of unreserved and unallocated plus the current year brings the fund up to about $12.1 million at the end of FY23. Which in turn, then now I'm moving over to the next orange column, FY24, based on the budget that was adopted by this board and then updated per Secretary Moore's comments to reflect governor's recommended changes. There are 26.23 base excuse me, that's the updated revenue forecast on line F or G rather, is 26.23 million for FY24. Of that, there are 21.8 million budgeted. This is on line W, X perhaps. Sorry, it's a busy chart here and hard to follow exactly along. So for a projected surplus of 4.4, and that's not including then the transfers, which in fact bring the FY24 total spend above the projected revenue for FY24. I'm on line AE. So after all of the transfers, the board chose in essence to eat into that 12.1 of FY23 surplus next year by spending above what's available in revenue. That leaves, I think, a healthy cushion of about 7.8. That's at the end of FY24. And that fund balance would then carry forward into FY25. And you can see in the final column, there are proposed use totals. There's obviously, the board hasn't gone through the complete budgeting cycle yet. The line items aren't set, but in the FY24 clean water budget, there were estimates as to FY25 uses, excuse me, to kind of give a sense where we'll land in a couple of years. And that gets back, I think, to my earlier comments that having that, in this case, $5.9 million buffer, I'm on line W, truly line W of the final column. That really provides, I think, this board the flexibility moving forward if the e-board forecasts start to revise downward, or based on actual receipts, the revenue really seems to be headed in a different direction. Since there's not the base budget pressure on the Clean Water Fund, those roughly $6 million provide a reasonable cushion in which to make adjustments, I think, in the out years. So as always, apologies that this is a very number dense chart. I'm certainly happy to speak in more detail to any piece of it. I know I've moved fairly quickly through some of that, but want to be respectful of time here today.
Flint has his hand up.
Yeah. Hi, folks. The joy of looking at multiple tabs at the same time. So I'm trying to reconcile this with the spreadsheet Secretary Moore went over previously.
So I don't know if you want to take that, Nick, or you want me to take it?
I was just wondering, Bob, is there a piece in particular you're looking at, or looking sort of for direction on where to look?
Yeah, I'm trying to, sorry, I'm, like I said, I've got, Neil, I think, has multiple screens. I've just got one screen.
You can tell, can't you?
So let's say the FY24 column and how that jives with the FY24 that Secretary Moore went over, the changes in yellow. I'm trying to compare apples to apples here.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
I'd be happy to help jump in too, Nick, if.
Sure, yeah,
sorry.
Emily, if you'd like to.
I think the most important connection is that the total appropriations and transfers should add up to, between Clean Water Fund base and one-time funds, would add up to what's consistent in the operating statement. And the one-time funds that we've been planning to spread out across state fiscal year 24 and 25 budgets come from the bottom line of the closeout of FY22, that $10.8 million, which has then been carried over on the bottom line in the operating statement and will finally be included in the appropriated values in the proposed FY24 budget partially, and then we're planning to carry part of that value over. So you can see the remaining one-time fund balance is that $5.89 million value that is also showing up. If you look at the FY24 one-time clean water fund bottom line, the total balance there lines up. So I don't know if that helps to connect and orient where there's those cross connections.
Yeah, I think it does. I'll spend more time with it and I can ask you stuff offline. But
Absolutely. Definitely happy to answer any questions. I think there's a lot of numbers and a lot of interconnected pieces, and it can be a little bit difficult to orient unless you've been in the weeds.
thank you.
Nick, was there anything you wanted to add to that?
No, thank you, Emily, for that. I would just add, Bob, if it's helpful, I'm also happy to follow up offline. It's a little bit obfuscated by the fact that in the operating statement, transfers show up in a different place. There's a couple places where like Lakes in Crisis, for instance, shows up differently in the budget than it does in the operating statement. But hypothetically, you should be able to tie every one of these appropriations back to a place in the budget. So thanks for that clarification. And no, Emily, that's really all I had by way of presentation. Like I said, happy to speak in more detail to any specific piece, or again, if folks have questions, I would be happy to make myself available offline for follow-up. And as always, want to acknowledge the partnership with our folks, our colleagues at the tax department, who are really integral in tracking the actual receipts. So thanks in particular to Erin Hicks Tibbles over there for her help with some of this.
Thank you, Nick. One last thought to point out before moving on. If you look at line AF, the contingency reserve, I would just remind members of the board, we made a decision to increase that contingency reserve. That is in no way long-term binding, right? If we need to, and that's the next topic that Emily's going to talk about here, is how we approach that contingency reserve, how it's intended to be deployed. So part of the reason AI down below, the very, very bottom line, drops by $2 million year to year is the implementation of that contingency reserve as well, which is intended to be kind of money to help us get through some of the uncertainty we're facing here. So unless there are any other questions, I think, Emily, we can start the next segment of the agenda.
Just getting my screen share set up here. Thank you. Thanks, Nick, for that really helpful presentation of the operating statement. Really grateful for Nick's expertise on this. And now I'm going to provide a quick, hopefully, overview of the updated Clean Water Fund Contingency Reserve Plan. The full plan is included in the board materials package, but I wanted to pull out some of the details and presentation slides to help walk you all through it, and then there will be time for some discussion and questions at the end. So before I get into the updated plan, I wanted to give a quick summary of the previous plan that was in place, that was issued and adopted by the board in 2018. So previously, the 2018 plan involved holding a reserve of clean water funds at about 10% of the annual revenue at the time, which was roughly $5 million in annual revenue. So $500,000 or 10% of that was held in reserve. The main use of the 2018 plan was to maintain a positive cash balance in the event that revenue underperformed compared to what was projected and appropriated in any given state fiscal year. And in the case that revenue were to overperform, then that projected balance, or that actual balance, would then be carried into the next state fiscal year budget build. So the updated plan still carries forward that goal of revenue protection, but there are some key updates that I wanted to walk you all through today. So the primary purpose of the plan continues to be managing risk in the event of revenue underperformance. So that's continuing to be the case. And this also continues the approach where if revenue were to overperform, that balance, that positive balance would then be programmed in our next budget building process, the next state fiscal year budget build. The update to this plan primarily is that it adds a secondary purpose to manage an additional risk, a risk in the event of clean water project loss. And I'll get into a little bit more a little later on what that means. And as the board had passed in the last state fiscal year 24 budget build, this plan also involves updating the reserve amount from $500,000 to $2.5 million because the Clean Water Fund annual revenue have grown significantly since the 2018 plan was put into place. So now we're operating roughly around $25 million of annual revenue. And so $2.5 million in reserve reflects 10% of that annual balance. But I just want to be clear that that is a one-time addition to the reserve, and it's not something that has to be budgeted every year. The only time additional allocations would need to be made to the reserve is if it were to be utilized, and then we would need to allocate funds to replenish that reserve balance. So I just wanted to be clear about that nature of the reserve. So now I'm going to walk you through the primary purpose of the reserve, which is to guard against revenue underperformance. And then later I'll get into the secondary purpose of the reserve, which is related to clean water project loss. So the primary purpose is to maintain that positive cash balance in the Clean Water Fund and avoid or minimize the risk of expending more funds than revenues available in any state fiscal year. And this is in the event that revenues underperform compared to projections. So revenue projections that Nick just presented in the operating statement for the upcoming state fiscal year are the basis of our annual budget targets and appropriations. So each summer, when we're getting ready to develop the annual budget for the year ahead, we look at the operating statement and we pull the revenue projections from there and use that as our budget target. There's a complicated dynamic, though, where those actual revenues are accruing in parallel with implementation of a budget. So as we are accruing the revenue, we're also starting to make financial commitments under that state fiscal year budget and often begin spending, although spending can span beyond the state fiscal year. So if revenue were to underperform compared to what we had projected, the Clean Water Fund could potentially approach a negative cash balance. And without having this reserve in place, it would put the state agencies in a really uncomfortable position of potentially needing to reconsider, delay, or cancel financial commitments that we have made through grants and contracts. And it would trigger the need for the board to reconvene mid-budget implementation and reprioritize the budget down to a contracted budget target with reduced funding. So so mitigation of the risk, if revenues underperform, by having this reserve in place, it reduces the risk of these program impacts on spending above the available amounts in any given fiscal year. And by mitigating those risks, it also streamlines our budget processes by minimizing the need for a mid-year reprioritization of the budget. So that's a little bit of context on sort of the risk we're trying to manage and the value that the reserve brings to managing risk. So application of the reserve, when does this get triggered? So each year we have 2 milestones of revenue monitoring where we get an updated Clean Water Fund operating statement. There's one in the January timeframe. Nick just presented that to us for today's board meeting. And then the next one will happen in the July-August timeframe, depending on the timing of the emergency board meeting. So that July-August operating statement determines the final actual revenues for the state fiscal year that recently closed. State fiscal years end June 30th. And so at that point in time, when we close out the most recent state fiscal year, if revenues overperformed, the board would program that unallocated, unreserved balance in our next budget build, adding that to the projected revenue for the upcoming state fiscal year and building a budget based on those targets. If revenue were to underperform equal to or less than the contingency reserve, so less than $2.5 million, then that would activate the use of the reserve to maintain a positive cash balance in the fund. And if that were to happen, then the board must first replenish that reserve balance in the next state fiscal year budget proposal before allocating those new monies to budget line items and activities. So whenever the reserve is applied, we're effectively borrowing from a future state fiscal year budget to fill a current revenue gap. However, so the reserve, it mitigates risk, but hypothetically, you could have a case where revenue underperformed greater than the reserve amount, so greater than $2.5 million. If that were the case, which we hope would be extremely rare, worst case scenario, then the reserve would be insufficient to maintain a positive cash balance in the fund. The board would need to reconvene, determine if the board would like to activate the reserve to partially cover the gap in revenue, and then reprioritize based on the reduced funding available. And that could potentially impact the current or the recently closed or current state fiscal year that we're implementing. Something similar happened with the COVID-19 pandemic, the early stages where we needed to implement some budget adjustments, and agencies looked at the status of their financial commitments under their funding programs and identified where certain financial commitments could either be delayed or, well, in the most part, they were all postponed to the next state fiscal year. So there's some ways to manage this, but this is the worst case scenario. So those are the three different outcomes that could be triggered based on the results of that summer operating statement. And there is a graphic in the contingency reserve plan. If you look at page 5 of that plan in the meeting materials, figure 1 in that document, I'm going to walk you through this now kind of piece by piece to help to visualize how this, how one state fiscal year revenue monitoring informs other state fiscal year revenue monitoring and budget planning. So just to orient you to what's happening in this visual, across the top, we have calendar year 2023 through 2024 with some of the revenue monitoring milestones. And then along the left-hand side of this visual, you can see the state fiscal year markers. And so the green demonstrates the start and end of state fiscal year 23, the yellow state fiscal year 24, and the orange state fiscal year 25. So you can see how at any point in time we're monitoring the revenue for multiple state fiscal years, and those implications are interconnected across state fiscal years as well. So just to get us started here, for state fiscal year 2023, we are here today in this milestone of reviewing the revenue projections in the operating statement in the January-February timeframe. Coming up this summer, the state fiscal year 23 will close on June 30th. And then soon after, we will get our Clean Water Fund operating statement in July or August. At that point, we can determine the state fiscal year 23 revenue appropriation balance and make a determination of how things are tracking and what some of those implications may be for this contingency plan. So in the event, so this little number bar here kind of shows the spectrum of outcomes. If the revenue appropriation balance is greater than 0, so it's a positive balance, then that will get carried forward. If that balance is a negative value, but greater than negative $2.5 million, then we would apply the reserve and subtract that negative balance from the state fiscal year 25 budget targets. So effectively borrowing from state fiscal year 25 to fill that revenue gap in the fund. But if the deficit is greater than $2.5 million, then the board would need to reconvene and reprioritize funds. So because the state fiscal year 24 budget at that point in time this summer will already be underway and being implemented by state agencies, we skip over state fiscal year 24 to carry that state fiscal year 23 balance into state fiscal year 25's budget development process. So this graph shows that kind of leapfrog from over state fiscal year 24 into state fiscal year 25. At this point in the summer, we will just be starting to get ready to prepare the state fiscal year 25 draft budget proposal. So we'll take a look at the Clean Water Fund operating statement from Nick, see what the projected revenue are at that point in time for state fiscal year 25, and add the state fiscal year 23 balance to that. If it's negative, that's going to effectively be subtracted to replenish the risk reserve. If it's positive, then that's a little bit of additional one-time funds for us to allocate as part of the budget. And then from there, we go through the summer budget development process, goes through the legislative review, and then beginning in July of 2024, we start implementation of the FY25 budget. And just to play it out a little further, this could also happen between FY24 and FY26. So at this point in time, we are here. We have received our updated revenue report in the operating statement for FY24. This summer, FY24 begins. The agencies start to implement those programs. We continue to monitor revenue in the July and January milestones. And then next summer, when state fiscal year 24 closes on June 30th, then we will see the operating statement at that time will give us the final balance of revenue for state fiscal year 24 actuals. And depending on where that balance lands, we can determine what the implications are, skipping over state fiscal year 25 budget because that's already being implemented and we would like to avoid any impacts to actively implemented budgets, skip over that to inform the budget targets for the state fiscal year 26 budget build, which we will be starting on next summer. So hopefully this helps to kind of solidify the interconnectedness of all of the different state fiscal year revenue monitoring and budget cycles, and the intent behind the reserve plan to really minimize the interruptions to the budget as it's being implemented and to mitigate those risks. So the full chart you can see here is on page 5 of the contingency reserve plan. If you want to take a closer look. And now I'm going to switch gears to give a quick overview of the secondary purpose of the reserve, which is clean water project loss. So this purpose is to avoid and minimize the risk of losing pollution reduction performance of clean water projects that are contributing to clean water service providers' targets if those projects are lost or fail due to unforeseen circumstances or acts of God. And this is pursuant to the Clean Water Service Provider Rule that was adopted a couple years ago at this point. So the definition of risk here is that the state of Vermont is really relying on the formula grant program and those grants to clean water service providers to meet the non-regulatory portion of pollution reduction requirements to achieve what we call total maximum daily loads, or TMDLs. And if a project is lost or fails under this program, its pollution reduction performance is also lost. And redirecting any of the formula grant funds that would have otherwise been used for a new project to restore the lost performance of a failed project could slow our progress toward meeting these TMDL targets. So to mitigate the risk, this plan expands the scope of the reserve, where the board may choose to allocate reserve funds to restore the lost project performance, pollution reduction performance. And use of the reserve may partially mitigate that project loss by effectively spreading that cost out across all clean water budget activities, as the use of the reserve funds will reduce revenues available for appropriation in the next budget cycle, rather than those costs being solely borne by the formula grant program. So it really is a matter of prioritization. If the board, if we do have an event of clean water project loss, then the board should consider risk of revenue underperformance, make sure that the primary purpose of the reserve is in good shape before allocating funds to the reserve's secondary purpose, which is clean water project loss. The board may determine that the risk of allocating reserve funds to address project loss is not tolerable if there seems like there could be risk that these reserve funds will be needed to guard against revenue underperformance. And when weighing those risks, we recommend that the board look at the economic context and consult with the Department of Taxes to assess the risk of requiring the use of reserve funds for revenue underperformance, using some tools like the Clean Water Fund operating statement, evaluating the economic outlook and degree of uncertainty. We also recommend that the board consider risk related to the clean water budget context. So considering the costs of restoring the lost clean water project performance in the context of the Clean Water Fund statutory priorities, and determine if those costs of the lost project should be spread out across the clean water budget activities, or if they should be borne solely by the formula grant program. Because whenever the reserve is used, it is effectively borrowing from the future state fiscal year revenue available. So that is part of the prioritization here is, in other words, is the board willing to borrow from next year's clean water budget revenues to restore pollution reduction performance associated with that lost clean water project performance. So that's the purpose and the mitigation of risk, the application of the reserve, and then because this is a new function of the reserve, we wanted to give a little bit of a preview of what the administrative approach would look like for this clean water project loss. So if the board were to determine that the reserve funds should be used to restore performance of lost clean water projects, DEC would work with the governor and the legislature to obtain the necessary authorizations to spend those dollars. A reminder that the reserve currently, we do not have spending authority to use those reserve dollars, so we would need to go through that authorization process. And then DEC, who we oversee the water quality restoration formula grants, would also be responsible for administering and determining the eligibility and prioritization for use of these reserve funds for clean water project loss. DEC will also determine how the reserve funds should be allocated across formula grants, factoring pollution reduction progress and remaining targets for that program. And then in the next budget cycle, the board would need to replenish the reserve balance by subtracting that from the next year's budget target before allocating funds to any of the other budget line items and activities. So that was a lot of content to cover. All of that is in detail in the plan, and be happy to answer any questions or open it up for discussion. Jim, I see you have your hand up.
Yes, thank you, Emily, for walking us through that. I want to say I think the board has been very responsible year to year in terms of not spending every dime that's on the revenue projection and setting aside money in case the revenue wasn't there. As you pointed out, appropriations are just a plan, and there's two sides to them. There's the expenditure side and there's the revenue side. So as you said at the end, even if we have more revenue, you can't spend it. You have to go to the legislature to get approval to spend it. Just like there's less revenue, you can put special funds into the red. You can close your books with a negative special fund. I looked in the state's CAFRA for the last ones that's available, and across state government, there's $73 million in deficit across special funds. Not that I'm supportive of that. I don't think that's a great thing to do. But I think that when we develop a budget, we look at where we're going to spend our money, what our projected revenue is. We look at that, during the year. I don't believe you have responsibility for cash. I believe that's the treasurer's office, that The Agency of Human Service itself draws 1.6 billion of federal funds, 1.7 billion of global commitment. There's nothing A&R can do that can affect the state's cash flow. The Agency of Human Services can bring the state's cash flow to its knees, but A&R can't. So I don't think it's an issue of cash. The other concern I have is the funds is set by statute. I don't believe that we can go and create a contingency reserve of something that's not in statute. I believe we can continue to do what we've done annually through the budget process, look at our expenditures, look at our revenue, and if we don't have sufficient revenue, then in the next year, make adjustments as the board seems fit to make adjustments and not necessarily tie the board's hands to this proposal.
Can I ask the clarifying question, Jim? Are you proposing, this is Julie, because I see that I'm off camera. Are you proposing that we not have any reserve at all?
No, I'm proposing that we continue doing what we've been doing, to look at the budgets every year and to maintain a contingency reserve as we have been done since I've been on the board.
Yeah, okay. I think, and I appreciate the way Emily presented this about sort of the primary purpose and the secondary purpose. I think the secondary purpose is pretty important to some of our stakeholders. The clean water service providers, I think, are anxious about what happens if there is an act of God, likely a flooding event that significantly damages a project that they're relying on to demonstrate reductions for multiple years, and what that would mean for their ability to actually fulfill the terms of their contract. And I don't know how we balance all of those pieces, but I think some of this is in response, or I know some of this is in response to comments that we've heard in working with clean water service providers to get them stood up, that they feel like they are being asked currently to assume the risk, and having some sort of cash in hand, constrained as it is by legislative authorization, helps mitigate that sense that they could be put in this untenable position of not being able to meet their targets, not because of the work they have performed, but because of damage to work they previously performed.
Right, but Julie, I think maybe it's educating them that the state budget's year to year, and one legislature can't tie the next year's legislature to a budget. And if bad things happen, we'll all have to work together as we have, over the years, to figure out what's the best outcome for everyone. But even if the board passed this, the board could unpass it, if something bad happened. There's really no protection if that's what the purpose is for this group.
Understood. Do you have an alternate proposal you would like to make? I guess I'm struggling to make sure I understand what your vision might be.
My vision would be that we would continue to look at revenue and expenses year by year, and projected revenue and expenses, and make an adjustment in a subsequent year if we need to on either side, and continue to maintain some kind of contingency reserve, and we could debate each year what the correct amount of that would be.
Do you feel the $2.5 million that's being proposed here is too high?
No, what did we budget this year? Like $6 million? And then we have revenue that's coming in above that. So, no, I think we have to look at everything that's going on.
I see what you're saying is you're looking at sort of the carry forward balance too, is all part of what we have to kind of help make ends meet should the need arise. And that instead of setting I'm just trying to reflect back what I think I hear you say, which is instead of setting a fixed contingency reserve, that instead we would each year set a contingency reserve that would in part look at whatever we're carrying on the bottom line, as Emily described in this kind of leapfrog 2-year budget process. We'll know if what we're we know now, we don't know exactly now. We have some sense now we're going to have a positive balance going into making the FY25 budget. And so holding a contingency reserve this year doesn't seem as necessary as if we were close to zero or had the unfortunate set of circumstance of looking at potentially having overspent in the current fiscal year, in which case we might want to carve off that contingency reserve line item in the future year budget. Is that accurate?
Yes, I think this board has been very responsible in terms of cash and funding and appropriations. You know, I've seen other boards will spend every dollar that's appropriated on the expenditure side, regardless of the revenue side.
No, I agree. I mean, I think part of this is we're still learning as we go about our revenue sources, that they've been nothing if not changeable, particularly the red hot performance of the property transfer tax over the last several years, the complete unknown that was the sheets when it became credited to the Clean Water Fund, and just trying to balance all of that uncertainty with giving our partners in the field who are, you know, sort of planning several years out in terms of work through the project development and then ultimately moving to implementation, trying to give them some sense of what the size of the universe of funding opportunities is going to be. And it's a lot of moving pieces. I'm not critical of what you're saying. I'm just trying to make sure I understand what your suggestion is.
Well, welcome to the world of state budgeting. Talk about the mental health agencies. You could talk about hospitals. You could talk about the child care facilities. You know, they get an annual contract or grant. There's no per se guarantee for the future.
Right. Right. No, I agree. I think some of it is, I view us in the clean water space as being, maybe we're coming up on it, but we've for several years now been very much in a building and growing capacity environment, and that sort of ability to project a bit more certainty than probably otherwise exists in state budgets, I think has value in as we look for our partners to make commitments to this work through their own staffing decisions or asset acquisition decisions and other pieces. But right, nothing in the state budget is guaranteed year to year. It's only the year you have. I totally appreciate that. Neil has his hand up too.
Doug, would it be okay if I engaged on this point?
Yes.
Thank you. I appreciate it. And Jim, thanks very much. I just want to, the secretary is, you know, very cogent about the purposes for purpose number 2 of that risk reserve. And I just want to speak up on behalf of the service providers, because as you know, I've been working directly with them, and our team has in literally finally pushing that ship out of the dry dock into the ocean, and it's starting to move. And it's an exciting time. And there is a feeling of anxiety out there associated with, you know, taking on this apparatus. So unlike our designated agencies who've been doing it for a long time, you know, this is brand new activity for these clean water service providers. And I think that even if it's not done by this board for multiple years, but to establish, sort of draw a circle around those $2.5 million, and for those service providers to know that it's out there at need, would be helpful in the conversation. I think that's why we got the stakeholder comments that we did. So I'm not it's not my place to argue, but just to provide that sort of extra context about where we are in the evolution of the system. Thank you.
Would one possible way to address all of this be to sort of commit ourselves to some sort of periodic or routine review and revisiting of the amount of the reserve, whether it's as part of the annual budget process or on a set time frame, whether that's every 2 or 3 or 4 years, to both. I assume, and Jim, correct me if I'm wrong, but part of what I assume flagging is by putting this money in the reserve, we're not putting it to work towards our clean water goals, and need to be really thoughtful about not being so cautious that we actually delay progress that we might otherwise make by investing these dollars into on the ground efforts.
Right, I think it should be an annual decision of the board as to how much, how much of the projected revenue to spend and what to leave as reserve.
Bob?
Yeah, and I'll just back up, Jim. I mean, I think certainly annually, because who knows what the world is at a particular point in time, and just having an idea of what's coming as best we can guess in the future years at that point in time should help inform us or whoever's on the board in terms of the reserve balance. So I think annual is appropriate.
I would be happy to go back to the document and propose some adjustments to that effect if that is the direction that the board would like to take, and also maybe apply that line of thinking in the timeline and figure out where that decision point would land on each state fiscal year, if that would be helpful as a next step.
I think that from my vantage that would, Emily, I guess one sort of unanswered question is, I think because we're in this unique set of circumstance, this unique point in time right now where we have a significant balance on our bottom line that we're already carrying. I think the question about, right, the way I hear what I think Jim and Bob are saying is we are not just carrying a $2.5 million reserve. Right now, we're carrying a $2.5 million reserve plus a $6 million reserve, essentially by pushing forward one-time money. I don't know that there's anything to be, and so the net effect of that would be coming back not just with maybe some tweaks to the policy, but also a recommendation for what the dollar figure is that will drive the FY25 budget. Is that accurate? Okay, I see Bob nodding.
And the FY25 budget targets are going to be updated as we have updated revenue projections, and we also proposed spending the remaining one-time funds that were available as unallocated unreserved at the close of state fiscal year 22, acknowledging that the balances available at the end of state fiscal year 23 are still unknown until this summer. But that could maybe be a point of discussion with the board when we get ready to build the FY25 budget, is, if there's additional projected one-time unallocated unreserved, whether we want to be conservative or start to bank on that as part of the program dollars for the upcoming budget cycle. I think we took a really conservative approach when we were building FY24 to only count on what was actual unallocated unreserved. But if the board is comfortable programming some of projected unallocated unreserved, that's maybe a good point of discussion as we get into the FY25 budget build, if I'm understanding and following the line of thinking there.
that is consistent with my line of thinking. I don't know about Bob or Jim.
You never know, right? No, I think we're saying the same things.
Yeah. Yes.
Yeah, I think with the revenue trends, I think we're all trying to, peer into the future as hard as we can so that, we don't have a sharp stop or, have a massive disruption to our level of program activity from year to year, so that we're trying for like a smooth landing or something along those lines. In part of Jim's questions, and Jim, please correct me if I'm hearing this wrong, but I also heard a little bit um, of kind of questioning, like, what is the board's authority to take this type of action mid-cycle? So our process, generally, we recommend the budget, the governor then takes our recommendation, moves it forward, the legislature approves that budget. Generally speaking, we don't have any direct control of those funds after the budget has been created, right? And I don't, Emily, or Nick, is the $2.5 million reserve like a formal item in the budget that the board would have authority over? And that this proposal would then latch in, because what I'm trying to figure in my head is sorry for everyone who doesn't use the system, but I just need to say it this way for Nick. What vision depth ID would an award be linked to fund a disrupted project or replace a disrupted project under the secondary purpose as Emily presented it?
It's a good question, Doug. I mean, we're off mute. Yeah, my understanding is that this doesn't exist as a formal fund. Obviously, this is sort of an informal subdivision of the Clean Water Fund for budgeting purposes, right? And I think it's reflected like that in the budget document. I mean, to Jim's points earlier, this $2.5 million or prior to this $500,000 carve out is really just a formalization, I think, of that annual board decision to leave a certain amount on the bottom line. So in terms of the depth ID, I mean, I assume it's just coming out of the Clean Water Fund. So I think it would come, I imagine you would account for it the same way that you would account for the project originally. And that could be a further question for the FinOps folks, but I assume there'd be no real substantive difference if it's coming out of the reserve fund, even though the reserve is really just a set aside.
Mm-hmm. Jim?
As I understand, the Clean Water Fund is a special fund in state accounting. So that $2.5 million would just drop to the bottom line as cash when you close the books, if everything. Yeah. So it's not appropriated to be spent. It's not tied to anything. It's just cash at the end in the fund.
Right. And yes, so, and as you said earlier, you can go negative against a special fund. We're obviously trying to avoid that. The fact that we have, 73 million of negative as a state is not a positive element of our financial reviews. Some of that we have a plan for getting out of. Some of it is in a bad situation. But the board, I guess what I'm driving at is, and part of the discussion helped jostle some of this loose with me. The board doesn't have any direct spending authority. So say we can't establish spending authority on the Clean Water Fund, right? Some boards can spend directly out of their fund. We can't spend directly out of our fund. So even if we set this policy, I'm wondering if there are other mechanical elements that would need to be put in place so that we could choose to fund a project. Because I'm not sure all the elements are there on the back end of the state side to do that. Unless the contingency reserve was a formally recognized element that the Clean Water Board had financial control over or spending authority to then transfer funds to other places.
Right, Doug. So that was the other part I was raising. In statute, I don't think we could create this carve out because the statute says, the possible purposes of the fund. Mm-hmm. So I would, again, revert back to looking at expenditures and revenues, mid-year, annually, and making adjustments as necessary.
Well, I agree with you and I disagree a tiny bit because I think we can recommend this as an expenditure, but I think it may have to go through and be formally recognized by the legislature as a budget item in order for us to actually execute on funding a project with this, because it is a clean water expenditure, right? It's clearly within the scope of the board, like because it's talking about supplementing or replacing a project that was already qualified as a clean water expenditure. But I think from an authority perspective, I think if we want to adopt this now, I don't think it would. The second option, I'm actually starting to question myself on whether or not we could actually do it without it being recognized in the fiscal year 24 budget. That would give the board the authority to take the action later.
Doug, if it's helpful for me to jump in, I think our thinking was that on an annual basis, the clean water service providers will report to the state on their progress. If they report to us that there is a clean water project loss, then we would bring that information to the Clean Water Board, and the board could do a risk assessment of are we willing to put some of the Clean Water Fund revenue that's unallocated, unreserved in the contingency toward this need. And if that were the case, then the Department of Environmental Conservation would work with the administration and the legislature to obtain that spending authority, but implement it as part of the formula grant program. So it wouldn't be its own standalone authorization, but it would be added to an existing program. And also to acknowledging that that project that's lost at that point in time, there may be a more cost-effective option available on the ground to restore that performance of phosphorus reduction. And so we want to keep it flexible. Maybe the best option is to restore that specific project, but maybe not, there's a need to prioritize in the broader watershed context. So that's really what we were trying to get at, or the intent behind the administrative approach that we've started to outline in the slide that I'm showing now. Just trying to the greatest extent possible, utilize existing reporting and budget processes. The other thing I would just want to highlight is that the clean water budget process is a public process. And so to the extent that we can minimize any need for budget adjustment midstream, that also is a benefit to our partners who are following along this process and trying to keep track of everything along with us. There's a lot of capacity from both our team and the attendees at these meetings and commenting on the process. So just trying to maintain streamlined budget processes for a transparency benefit. So I just wanted to provide that additional context too, if it's helpful. Mm-hmm.
Okay, so at this point, we've obviously gone over our time for this item and kind of consumed the time for the next item as well. I think at this point it would make the most sense to forgo requesting a formal motion from the board, and we can take it back for some more discussion. Is that any objections to that approach? All right. Emily, do you think we do need to maintain this, but do we have anyone signed up for public comment today?
We do.
Okay.
Yes.
All right.
We have 6 or 7 folks who have signed up to comment.
All right. Sorry, I'm just a little stuck in my head on the water quality trading report, the best course of action there.
Yeah, I know.
might offer, Doug, I don't think this is a more a board point of information than anything that requires action. It's a report we're delivering to the legislature. And so while I look forward to the opportunity to having the board sort of provided with an overview and have the opportunity to ask questions, I'm not sure that it's particularly time sensitive and could be pushed off to the next agenda.
Thank you, Secretary Moore. Yeah, I think that makes sense. Then we'll push that item to the next agenda. If any board members have questions, of course, in between this meeting and the next meeting, I would encourage you to reach out to A&R. All right, so Emily, let's jump into public comment then.
Okay, we have some folks who have signed up to comment ahead of time. First on the list is Pat Susie. I hope I pronounced the last name correctly.
Thank you. It's Swazi, actually.
Oh, my apologies.
But you're close. Thank you. That's okay. I'm president of the Federation of Vermont Lakes and Ponds. The Federation is a coalition of primarily volunteer lake associations around the state. I noted on the clean water funding fact sheet that among the goals for clean water funding is protecting public health and safety, enhancing recreation, improving fish and wildlife habitat. Yet not one penny of clean water funding goes to aquatic invasive species prevention and control. Yet aquatic invasive species are a biological pollutant that damages aquatic habitat, contributes to water quality degradation, impedes recreation, and threatens public health. It is one of the 10 major stressors on Vermont's public waters. For 2023, for our summer season of 2023, prevention and control of aquatic invasive species funds have been reduced to $350,000 for the entire state. Let me repeat that, $350,000, that's it for the entire state. The burden for dealing with aquatic invasive species prevention and control has long been on the shoulders of volunteer lake associations and local municipalities. And in spite of their heroic efforts, and believe me, they are heroic in terms of raising money, in terms of volunteer hours spent on greeter programs, on dealing with control, we are still seeing aquatic invasive species spreading. We had 3 new infestations this past summer, and we are also seeing some very serious aquatic invasive species threatening our state, hydrilla being one of the scariest on its way up the Connecticut River. Whether this is a policy created or whether it's something that can be changed to not use clean water funds to address this problem of aquatic invasive species, I don't know. But clearly, if this really disastrous underfunding of the prevention and control of aquatic invasive species is not recognized and is not addressed, preferably in the near future, it is clear that the goals of the Clean Water Fund to improve public health, to protect public health, to enhance recreation, to improve wildlife habitat are just never going to be realized. I think it's time that things actually change and that this is recognized as a real serious problem facing our public waters in the state. Thank you.
Thank you for your comment. We'll be sure to record that in the minutes. Next on the list for comment is Brandon Golnick. Doing a quick scan to see if they are in attendance. Don't believe that they are able to make it. Next on the list is Jim Carroll. I don't see them on the attendee list either, unless they're in the conference room. No, I don't think so. Okay. Next is Ken Mink. Don't think I see them on the list either. Next is Ernie Englehart. Hi. Angela. I see you're here. If you'd like to unmute and comment.
Yes, yes, I just push that button. First, I'd like to thank the Clean Water Board for all their efforts. I know it's a real balancing act when you have so much that needs to be done and so only so many dollars to do it. We appreciate all your support. I did want to mention that this has been a very disappointing year for us at Lake Carmi. I think one of the worst years we've had since we've been at the lake since 1991. Things aren't going that well. We have had a all in, and everyone has been doing a lot. The Ag Department has come up with a lot of newer or more improved practices in terms of land management and manure management. There are a lot of studies have been done by UVM on groundwater and surface water runoff and all sorts of different things. We're still, the lake is still suffering. Both humans and a lot of the small aquatic animals in the lake are suffering from the cyanobacteria blooms. So I just want to mention that we hope that the board and ANR and Ag and all others involved continue all an approach to try to solve the problem of Lake Carmi. We've considered, the LCCA board has considered Lake Carmi sort of like a field laboratory for options and ideas that can be put into practice and into place to improve water quality, not in just in Lake Carmi, but in all the waters of the state. And we need your help, and thank you for your time. Goodbye.
Thank you, Ernie. Next on the list is Jennifer Andrews. I believe Jennifer is here. Earlier she was.
Hi, yes, thank you very much. Appreciate all the hard work that you all are doing. I am not a numbers person, so I'm always in awe of people who are. As an on-the-ground volunteer for the quest of water quality, I implore you to find a way to address the lack of funding for prevention and control of aquatic invasive species. Our beautiful state relies on tourism as an economic driver, a major economic driver. As it stands now, greeter programs, the initial aquatic invasive species inspection stations, which are at many accesses on points of Vermont's lakes, ponds, and rivers, are at risk of lack of funding and have been for several years. We need more revenue to continue to operate and not rely on added support from volunteers like me and bottle and can returnables. We are the first point of contact to keep Vermont water free from the spread of aquatic invasive species. An ounce of prevention is definitely worth the pound of cure, as Lake Carmi surely knows. As a grant writer for the Shadow Lake Greeter Program in Glover, I see the amount for funding assistance decrease annually. These programs are critical for the protection of public waters. Inspection of boats and floats and bilges and trailers and anchors and lines and vehicle bumpers are crucial in the quest for clean water without invasive species. As the list of invasives is ever increasing, so too should our funding. Please increase this budget for AIS prevention and control. Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I believe the final commenter on our list is John Costa.
Thank you, Emily. Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for allowing me to speak and for all the work that's been done in trying to save Lake Carmi to date. I will be brief because we've been traveling down the cyanobacteria road for a number of years now. But we've talked a lot about the causes, the impact on recreational use, and even to some degree its effect on property values. Though we haven't really addressed strong enough of the health issues surrounding cyanobacteria blooms, partly because the research appears to be still relatively new. It's one thing to lose the use of the water in our lakes and ponds, but there's a larger and more dangerous impact now looming before us, and that's the air we breathe. We had a water quality scientist who visited Lake Conway in 2022, and he stated that the air within a half-mile of the bloom can be unhealthy to breathe. We have a great debt to ourselves and to future generations. That is to provide a safe and healthy environment, whether it's here in northern Vermont, the rainforest of the Amazon, or the oceans that surround us. You, as the Clean Water Board, have the ability to begin that process by setting Lake Conway as an example of how mankind can fix what mankind has and continues to destroy. Please help us save our lake. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And my apologies, I missed Rob Evans on the list of folks who signed up to comment. Rob, would you like to share your comment as well?
Yeah, thanks, Emily. And I just want to echo what John and Ernie had both said. I first want to acknowledge the work of this board to ensure that the state's water quality goals and objectives are met, and the work of our state agencies who are charged with providing the oversight and management of many of these future water quality initiatives. I'm the president of the Franklin Watershed Committee and have been a camp owner at Lake Carmi for over 15 years. And since 2018, when Lake Carmi was designated the state's only lake in crisis, we've seen a full court press of local, county, and state water quality partners working to enhance the water quality at the lake. We've seen a tremendous amount of work in our watershed designed to reduce the levels of phosphorus that run into our lake. We've seen shoreline improvements, private road enhancements, septic system improvements, tributary work, and a greater collaboration and partnership with our farming community. The Franklin Watershed Committee and the Lake Carmi Campers Association are pleased that DEC will be using the Lakes in Crisis funds in 2023 to reconfigure the Lake Carmi aeration system and continue the high-frequency monitoring work led by the University of Vermont. This monitoring provides critical data that will inevitably lead to better water quality solutions. We also want to acknowledge the work in the watershed to reduce external phosphorus loading also needs to continue so that DEC meets the total maximum daily load phosphorus reduction target. DEC should ensure that Franklin County NRCD has the funds they need to continue with their BMP identification work so that good project ideas can be submitted to the Missisquoi Basin Clean Water Service Provider for project design and implementation funding that support both Lake Carmi and the Lake Champlain TMDLs. We're also pleased that DEC will use the Clean Water Budget Innovation Funds to do the alum feasibility study for Lake Carmi this summer or early fall. And we ask that you also hold some of the funds in reserve for an alum treatment in early summer of 2024 if the study determines that alum is a viable solution for the lake's cyanobacteria and phosphorus internal loading challenges. And based on a recent Lake Morey feasibility study, an alum treatment at Lake Carmi could cost in excess of $1 million, but this is an important investment that could lead to significant returns and move Lake Carmi out of the crisis stage. And as John Costa had mentioned, what a success this would be for our lake, for our community, for our state, and for our environment. I, for one, can tell you that there's an air of excitement and cautious optimism around the lake. We've worked so hard, been so very patient, and have waited so very long to be at this point. There's so much positive energy working for our common goal, but we can't make it across the finish line without your continued financial support of our collective work. Thanks so much.
Thank you for your comment, Rob. I believe that completes the list of folks who signed up to comment ahead of time.
Right. Because we are over time, I feel conflicted about this, but I think because we're over time, I'm not going to extend an invitation for additional public comment if you didn't sign up. Please feel free to submit written testimony to the board, and we'll make sure that it is attached to the minutes. If we were not able to get to you today, I apologize, but I do want to also respect everyone's time commitments. So to close, other business, I just want to call people's attention to the link in the agenda for the Vermont Clean Water Initiative 2022 Performance Report that was submitted mid-January by the Agency of Natural Resources, working with the Agency of Administration. It has a lot of great information in there. I would say it puts a realistic and accurate picture. It does not put forward a rosy picture of our work. We have a lot of work ahead of us. And I think the Agency of Natural Resources does a great job on accurately portraying that and not trying to claim we're making more progress than we are. I think it's a difficult task and it's a long-term effort that we're engaged in right now. So I'd like to thank everyone for attending the February 22nd session of the Clean Water Board. And I'm sorry, I keep forgetting my protocol lately. Can I have a motion to adjourn from a member of the board? A second? Thanks, Jim. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Unanimous. That concludes the February 22nd meeting of the Clean Water Board. Have a good day, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Doug, Julie, Emily, everybody.
Emily.
Thank you.